So in Wheelock chapter 26, we are learning about the comparison of adjectives, and we learn a yet, well, I was going to say second, but definitely not the second. I don't know how many ablative uses we've learned, but this is a yet another one. So let's start with number one here. There are 3 degrees of adjectives. 3 degrees of adjectives. When we think about comparing nouns on the basis of some adjectival characteristics, there are 3 terms that we have to understand that relate to the form of the adjective we're going to see. And this is true in English, it's true in Latin. We can refer to the positive degree of the adjective, and this is the word that describes the simple adjective that accompanies a noun. So when we say the happy man, I've got happy man, okay, in Latin, vir beatus, okay, so the happy man. And this is just the normal adjective form. This is the one that you'll see when you get a new adjective in your lexicon or your vocab list. The comparative degree of an adjective is when I have a noun that is being compared to at least one other entity. So if there's 2 things and one of them has more of a quality than the other one, then I use the comparative form. In our example, the happier man. Maybe there's another man, this other one is happier than he is, okay? And that would be vir beatior in Latin, so the happier man. And then the superlative degree refers to when I have a noun that's being compared to 2 or more entities. So it's not just comparing one with another, but I'm comparing that one with 2 or more. Then I would use the superlative degree, and that's, in this example, the happiest man, or in Latin, vir beatissimus. So how do we form these different patterns of the adjective, the positive, comparative, and superlative degrees? In Latin, well, the good news is that for the positive, you don't have to form it. It's the one that's delivered to you, okay? It's always the lexical form as you learn it from your vocab list. The comparative degree of the adjective in Latin is the base of the positive adjective. So you have to know what the regular positive degree form of the adjective is. You take the base, and then we're going to add ior, and that's for masculine and feminine, and ius for neuter. Notice that we've been given here the genitive form, and it ends with is. What does that tell you about comparative adjectives ending with ior and ius? The genitive ends with is. What declensions follow? Third declension. That's right. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, but I just want you to see that. Now, superlatives are formed by taking the positive adjective, the base, and then we're adding issimus. Issima, issimum. Okay, so Looking at those, can you guess what the declension pattern of the superlatives are? 2, 1, 2. 2, 1, 2. Very good. Second, masculine second, right? Feminine is, so that's masculine. Second, feminine is first. Neuter is back to second declension. So those are familiar. They're old hat. We love them, right? We love them so much we want to marry them. Okay, so third declensions that are usually a little bit more difficult to remember. Okay, so a point of clarification here. For 2, 1, 2 adjectives, in other words, when we're talking about comparing, creating the comparative of the base and the superlative as well. The base or the stem technically has a vowel at the end. So you might recall that for second declensions, the nouns or the noun or the adjective, depending on whether it's a second declension noun or adjective, doesn't matter. The second declension, the stem ends with an O or a U, okay? And for first declension, it ends with an A. So these are nouns that have a stem ending with a vowel. O, U, second declension, first declension. And whenever we say here, it's the base, it's technically speaking the base minus these vowels that come at the end of the base or stem, okay? And so I'll show you what I mean here as we look at a couple of these examples. I've given you 3 here. Wheelock gives you 6. I think 6 is overkill, so just in terms of doing a real quick overview, here are 3. So we have this adjective longus. Say that with me, longus.
Longus.
And there's 3 forms because this is a 2, 1, 2 adjective. Notice that the patterns have in the masculine us. We also see like the ablative and the dative, we have O, right? So I told you it's either O or U. Originally it's O, weakened to U sometimes. Here's the A, and here's the U or O for the neuter second declension. And when we say take the base, really, the base is longo and longa, but we're really just taking the form without that vowel, and we're grabbing long, right? And then we're adding what we're saying we add here, ior for masculine and feminine, and ius for neuter, right? So we're not adding it to the real base because the base includes those vowels, O, U, and A. Okay, so longior, longius. Say that with me. Longior, longius. And that's longer. Longus is positive, longior, longer. And then I just grab that same base, long, without its stem vowel, and I add issimus to get these superlatives. Everybody, longissimus?
Longissimus.
Or instead of us, so longest, and that's the superlative form. All right? Now, some adjectives are not 2, 1, 2 adjectives like longus, longa, longum, but rather they're third declension I stem. And I've given you 2 examples here, fortis, forte. Now remember, with fortis and forte, when I have just the 2 forms in my lexical form, the first one covers masculine and feminine, the second covers the neuter, okay? But this is a third declension adjective. So where do I go to find the stem or the base?
Genitive.
I go to the genitive, and the genitive is here for you, fortis. So I drop the is ending, and fort is my stem or base. And I'm going to use that over here for the comparative and superlative. So fort plus what? Your for masculine and feminine. Fortis is brave, fortior is braver, if it's masculine or feminine. Fortius, braver if it's neuter. Okay, and then I borrow fort for the stem of the superlative, but just add issimus. Everybody, fortissimus.
Fortissimus.
Fortissima, fortissima. So bravest. And then potens, if you remember, potens means powerful or mighty. There's one ending for potens. This covers masculine, feminine, and neuter. All 3 use this one single ending. And the genitive is potentis. So how do I get the stem or the base? Go to the genitive, drop the is. Potent is the base, and that's what I use for the comparative. Potent, your, potentius. Okay, so this is not powerfuler, but more powerful. We'll talk about when we use more versus Okay, and then potent plus issimus is potentissimus. Potentissimus. And then and so most powerful. Now, let's talk about an alternate formation of the comparative and superlative here. You know how in English, we mostly use ER and EST on the end of adjectives, right? Nice, nicer, nicest, small, smaller, smallest. But in English, we can also use more or most in front of an adjective and leave the adjective in the basic positive form. So if I take a word like beautiful, and I want to say that something has more of that quality, I don't say beautifuler, I say more beautiful. And if it has the quality in the highest degree, or compared to everybody else, it's not beautifulest, but most beautiful, right? So we use more or most as well as or est. And in Latin, we have something similar. You could see magis for more and maxime for most, plus the normal positive adjective form. So you're not gonna add ior at the end and magis at the front, okay? You'll use one or the other, but not both. And idoneus is an example, meaning suitable. I could use magis in front of the positive degree form. Magis idoneus were more suitable, and maxime idoneus were most suitable. Okay, so just you won't see that often, but you do see. All right, so let's talk about the declension patterns real quickly. The declension patterns of comparative and superlative adjective. The comparatives follow a 3-3 adjective pattern. That is, the masculine and feminine are third declension and identical to each other. And then the neuter is third declension as well. However, and this is really important, these 3-3 comparative adjectives are not I stem in their pattern. Okay, they're not I stems. Now what I've done is down below on page 2, I've given you the positive degree I stem adjective fortis forte. The genitive is fortis, right? Brave. That is an I stem adjective that's 3-3. It's third declension in the masculine, feminine, and third declension in the neuter. As a point of comparison with the comparative, for our comparative adjective, it's non-I stem. Fortior and fortius. So those are third declension, but they don't follow the I stem pattern. Because I want you to be able to tell the difference. And I've put some shading on the comparative form so that you can actually see where they differ from the I stem type of third declension adjective. The superlatives follow standard 2-1-2 declension patterns like magnus, magnum, magnum, and therefore I don't give you a chart for that because you could probably wake up in the middle of the night and recite it from a dead sleep. At least I hope so. So on the left is the 2 termination I stem adjective brave. This is just a positive adjective, fortis, forte. And then on the right side, I've given you the 2 termination non-I stem adjective, which is the comparative version. Okay, we'll highlight positive versus comparative. So left side brave, right side braver. Okay. And what I want to just point out here is where they differ from each other. So let's read the comparative form starting with the masculine, feminine. So you can repeat after me. So these are all the forms of braver. Fortior.
Fortior.
Okay. Fortioris.
Fortioris.
Fortiori.
Fortiori.
Fortiorum.
Fortiorum.
Fortiore.
Fortiore.
So notice that fortis in our I stem adjective for brave, its nominative and its genitive are the same as each other because the nominative already has is. The genitive always has is, right? In fortior, I don't have the is there, but in the genitive it gets the is. So that's very normal third declension behavior. Dative is e, fortiori as well, fortiori. Fortem, fortiorum, that's normal. But with the ablatives, when they're I stem, I get the long I in that masculine, feminine singular. And notice that I get the normal ablative e for third declension because this isn't an I stem third declension form. So that's why I've got shading here because it reverts back to what the normal third declension forms are. And then let's look at the plurals, everybody. Fortiores,
Fortiores.
fortiorum,
Fortiorum.
fortioribus,
Fortioribus.
fortiores,
Fortiores.
fortioribus.
Fortioribus.
All right, now fortes has ace, just like fortiores, but notice the I stems get an I in the genitive plural. Remember ium instead of just But since these comparative third declension adjectives are not I stem, I get fortiorum rather than fortiorium. Okay, so it's just a normal and then everywhere else they're more normal. Okay, now let's look at the neuters real quickly. Fortius,
Fortius.
there's a singular, and then fortioris,
Fortioris.
fortiori,
Fortiori.
fortius,
Fortius.
fortiore.
Fortiore.
All right, now fortius is neuter nominative and accusative because all neuters have the same nominative and accusative forms, right? Notice that the is and e endings here are very normal third declension forms, and they actually match the masculine feminine side as well. And they match fortis and forti over here too, all very good. But look at the ablative. In the I stem forti, the neuter has the long I, but in the comparative, the ablative singular is the E, which is normal ablative third declension case. Okay?
Yeah.
And then look at the plural neuters, everybody. Fortiora,
Fortiora.
compare that with fortia, right? I stems get the I before the A in the neuter. Fortiorum,
Fortiorum.
and then here it's fortium. Notice I got that I because of I stems in the genitive plural. Get the I before the Not so here because these are not I stems. Fortioribus,
Fortioribus.
and then fortiora.
Fortiora.
Notice the nominative and accusative plural are the same, and there's no I because this is not I stem. And then fortioribus.
Fortioribus.
All right, good. So this is the pattern. Now, even if you don't remember whether the comparative form is I stem or not, you actually know enough to know how to parse the form, right? If you see ibis, it's ablative or dative plural, right? No matter which side we're on here, okay? If we see ace, that's accusative for the masculine, feminine. That's just very normal, right? If we have and that's neuter plural and nominative and accusative. We're accustomed to seeing that. So we should still be able to recognize the case endings even when we don't remember that there should or shouldn't be an I in certain forms. Okay. Now let's talk about usage and translation here real quick. Generally, when we translate, we want to translate Latin comparative and superlative adjectives with the suffix or est, or with more or most in front of the positive form, if appropriate. Now, a lot of people don't realize what the typical English rule is for when you use versus more something, or est versus most something. So here's the basic rule of thumb. If the positive degree adjective is one or two syllables, we usually use or est.
One or two.
Okay. So nice, how many syllables is that?
Two.
Nice. Nice is one syllable. Nice. Right, nice. So how would I make that comparative? I add er. So one syllable word, right? Nice, nicer. What would be the superlative?
Nicest.
Nicest, right? Okay, good. What about lovely? How many syllables are in lovely? Two. And how would I turn this to a comparative? I just add to lovely. Now the spelling changes, but it still sounds the same, right? Lovely, lovelier. Lovely, lovelier. Okay, but beautiful is how many syllables? Beautiful. That's a 3-syllable word. If I added er, that would be a cumbersome 4-syllable word. Beautifuler, right? Yeah. And so instead we prefer to put more in front and to leave beautiful the same. More beautiful. Okay, so that's generally the rule of thumb. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, now, so that's the general translation strategy. Now, there are some other comparative uses besides comparing one thing to one thing, or superlative use comparing one thing to two or more. And so we hit those here. Sometimes using the comparative Latin adjective, the comparative form, is used with the sense of rather, or you could even say quite, so that whatever you're describing with it has a quality to a higher degree than normal. So our example here is lux, which is light, and clarior is bright in the comparative. So, I mean, you might translate this as brighter light, right? But if in some circumstances, it's not really comparing one thing to another, it's comparing it to what's normal. And in such a situation, you could translate this as rather bright light or quite bright light, meaning it's a bright light that comparative use for being brighter than is customary, okay? And then the second use of the comparative form is for the sense of having too much of a quality. So not just a higher than normal quality, but high to the point of excess, being too much. And in our example here, we have vita eius. Remember, this is our genitive third person pronoun. The life of him, his life. Erat, imperfect, was. And then this is a comparative form with the eor ending, right? Brewis is short. Brewior, you might want to translate this as his life was shorter. But if this is the end of the statement, I'm not really comparing it to anything else. What am I saying? I'm saying it was too short, okay? Too short. If something's excessively heavy, I could say it's too heavy using the comparative form. So now, 2.3, we have other superlative usage. The superlative form could be used with the sense of having a quality to an exceptionally high degree beyond the usual or the ideal. So in our example here, we have vita eius erat, just like we had in this other example. His life was, but instead of the comparative, I have the superlative. His life was brevissima. And this means his life was short, very short. Can you see the difference here between the comparative sense for too much of a quality versus the superlative sense for exceptionally high degree, right? His life was too short. With the comparative, his life was very short in the superlative use. Too short. All right, let's look at the third point here, quam with comparatives. Now we're going to introduce the use of quam in making comparative statements and sentences. So quam can occur with the comparative form in Latin. When the conjunction quam follows the comparative adjective, I'm going to have the comparative adjective followed by quam. Okay. Translate quam as than. Translate quam as than, higher than, fuller than, shorter than, okay? And the case of the phrases being compared, one will come before the quam and one phrase will come after the quam. These will have the same case. So let's look at a couple of the examples that Wheelock provides. First one is a normal clause. So I have he libri sunt clariores quam illi. So here's our near demonstrative. These libri books. Sunt are. And now here I have claros, famous, in the comparative form, right? Ior, right? You see that comparative form? So I'm just gonna put comp here. That's a comparative adjective. Notice that quam follows the comparative adjective. These books are more famous. Quam, than, illi, those. Okay. What case is the case ending on the adjective? These books are more famous. See the ace ending? Got two possibilities, right?
Nominative or
Yep.
accusative.
Technically, that could be nominative or accusative, masculine or feminine plural. But notice that I've got sunt, a verb of be, right? And the subject of sunt is usually nominative. And so I would expect this to be nominative as well. So of my choice between nominative or accusative plural, this is nominative plural, okay? And then notice that illi, that long I, is also nominative plural. So what comes right before the quam is going to match the case of what comes after the quam, okay? In effect, what you're saying is these books are more famous than those books are. The those is nominative because there's an implied being verb there too. Okay, now here we have indirect speech. So dikit is he says, okay? And then everything after dikit is indirect speech. He says that something is the case. What is the verb for is? Esse, okay? This means are, but it's an infinitive, right? Because indirect speech uses an infinitive. So he says that something is or something are. Now, what's the subject? Hos libros. You see the os here forms? Those are the accusative subject of the infinitive because infinitive subjects are in what case?
Accusative.
Accusative. Now my predicate is going to be, the predicate of the infinitive be or are is going to be ace, but now what case is that? Accusative. That's accusative as well, right? The predicate's gonna be accusative too. So those books are more famous. Quam, and notice how illos after the quam has to match the same case. Accusative. The accusative as well, okay? So whatever comes before the quam, its case is gonna be matched by what comes after. He says that these books are Claudiores more famous than Hilos, those, implied those books. All right, now with that 3.2, quam can occur with superlatives as well. When quam precedes the superlative adjective. Note here, I've got that underlined because when we have comparatives, quam follows the comparative adjective. But in superlative use, the quam precedes the superlative adjective. It's not a conjunction, it's not joining things. It's functioning as an adverb and indicates that the noun has the quality to the highest possible degree. So our example here, again, this is from Wheelock. Amicus meus, my friend, erat, my verb, was, vir quam Eucondissimus. So he was a man. And then quam Eucondissimus. Is that a superlative adjective here? Do you see the ismus form? Right? Is the quam before it? Yes. So I want to translate this in such a way that the man is being described as having this quality to the highest possible degree. My friend was, vir quam Eucondissimus, was the pleasantest man possible, or the most pleasant man, or was as pleasant as can be, or was the most pleasant man of all, right? But we're trying to indicate that he holds this quality to the highest possible degree. All right, last point here. And number 4, the ablative of comparison. If the first noun being compared is nominative or accusative case, then instead of using quam followed by the thing you're comparing it against, you could see the quam dropped altogether. And then the noun that would have come after the quam will be in the ablative case. You're going to translate it the same way. More this than that. More of some quality or some quality with ER at the end. And then you won't have the word quam, but in English you have to supply than and then the ablative now. So let's look at our examples here. Consilia tua, your plans. Sunt, are. And then we have clariora. You see the ior comparative, right? That's a comparative, but there's no quam here, right? No. Okay. The a here, though, is what case? Consilia tua is nominative, plural, because this is neuter, right? It's a neuter noun in the plural. Clariora is nominative. And as we said, if the noun is nominative or accusative case, then we can omit the quam, and then this noun that's being compared with the first noun is going to be ablative. Y'all see that ablative case ending? So is more famous than. We have to supply the word than in English. Than light, than luke. So luke is the ablative. This in effect is equivalent to concilia tua sunt clariora quam lux. Lux is nominative because quam requires it to have the same case as clariora, which is nominative. Okay, but when I don't have quam, this is going to be ablative. Okay, and then number 2, quis in Italia erat clarior Cicerone. Who in Italy was clarior? There's my comparative adjective. Who was more famous? If Cicero's in the ablative case, then I need to add than. Who was more famous than Cicero? Okay, so this is an ablative of comparison. Ablatives of comparison happen with what kind of adjectives? Comparative adjectives. That's why they're ablatives of comparison. And then last, paucos feliciores patre tuo vidi. So vidi is my main verb, I saw or have seen. Paucos is my accusative direct object. Few, feliciores, there's my ior comparative, right? And this ace case ending is going to be, just realize I left the macron off there. That's accusative as well. I have met few men happier. Okay, happier than what? Well, I don't have quam here, but I do have patre tuo, which is ablative, isn't it? And I need to add than, happier than your father. Okay, so that's the kind of use we have. Notice that paucos is accusative, and I can do this omission of quam if my noun's nominative or accusative that's being compared. All right, so there you go.